The Democratic supporter of the Iran deal on Capitol Hill, Senator Tim Kaine. Thank you very much, Senator. First of all, Hillary Clinton actually took a tougher line than just President Obama. She called the Iranian regime a brutal regime. She went out. She said, I will use force, I'll use military action. She was tough on Vladimir Putin. She said her policy will be distrust but verify. And she made it very clear that there were, mistakes made when the administration decided not to go after Assad over those chemical weapons. Senator, sorry, I wanted to ask you your reaction to that.
Too long a wind-up. My bad.
I wondered if there was a question mark there. No, I've been reading the accounts of what she said, and look, I mean, on Iran, since we're up here really debating that for the next week or 10 days, she's right. It's a brutal regime. It's a regime that is active in destabilizing Yemen and in propping up Bashar al-Assad and trying to turn Iraq into a puppet state, and that's why it's so important that Iran not get nuclear weapons. And before diplomacy started, Andrea, the status quo, which pretty much everybody acknowledged, is the sanctions were punishing the Iranian economy, but it wasn't slowing down their nuclear program. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to this at the UN in 2012. He said, thank you, the sanctions are hurting Iran's economy, and here's a quote, but we have to face the truth. They're not stopping the nuclear program. So if we just don't do diplomacy and say we're just going to pile on more sanctions, we'll affect their economy, but they'll race ahead. They already have 20,000 centrifuges and 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium. They'll get more, and they'll either cross the nuclear threshold or we'll have to take military action to stop them. This puts it in a different path. For 15 years, 98% reduction in uranium, 2/3 reduction in centrifuges, get rid of the plutonium facility, and importantly, give us inspections. And Andrea, here's what inspections do. It gives us intel to find out if they're cheating. If we have to use military action, we'll be better able to target it, and it avoids us making a mistake. Remember, Vice President sort of led us into a war in March of 2003 saying, oh, don't trust the IAEA. They can't do inspections. Iraq has nuclear weapons. We went to war and they didn't. We've got to have these IAEA inspections so that we know with accuracy what Iran is doing. They're brutal now, but it would be much worse if they have nuclear weapons, and that's why I'm a realistic supporter of this deal.
Well, since you've teed up Dick Cheney, this is Cheney this week speaking against this deal and Hillary Clinton's response today.
Arming and funding Iran while simultaneously providing them a pathway to a nuclear arsenal is not an act of peace. It's not, as President Obama claims, the only alternative to war. It is madness.
Vice President Cheney may hope that the American people will simply forget, but the truth is, by the time President Obama took office and I became Secretary of State, Iran was racing toward a nuclear capability.
But the fact is that you've got Donald Trump outside, you've got all the Republicans lined up against it, and by almost 2-to-1, Americans in some polls are against this deal now.
Well, Andrea, look, it is always hard to do diplomacy even with friends. Diplomacy with adversaries is even tougher. President Kennedy confronted it when he tried to negotiate the nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. When President Nixon said, let's have an opening to China, China was supporting the North Vietnamese against us. They'd supported the North Koreans against us. President Reagan negotiated with the Soviet Union. The great presidents have often said, even though this nation is an adversary and we're not going to pretend otherwise, tomorrow's more important than today, and if we can find a path that will reduce the risk of the world, either of nuclear weapons or other threats, we should do it. This is a deal that at least for 15 years dramatically reduces the threat of a nuclear Iran. And that is an important step forward, and then we can focus our energy on their non-nuclear activity, and for that reason, I do think it is the best thing to do. And there is strong support for this. The immediate past two chairs of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John Warner and Carl Levin, wrote a piece, Why Hawks Should Support the Iran Deal. General Brent Scowcroft, General Colin Powell, good people and respectable people and friends of mine are on both sides of this, but there's a lot of people connected to the military and intelligence community in the United States and in Israel that think this is actually the best move going forward, and I agree with them.
as a former Democratic Party chair, are you disappointed with how long it has taken Hillary Clinton to apologize and to get on top of this email problem, this crisis that continues?
You know, I think what she said yesterday was appropriate. She said months ago, Andrea, as you know, look, looking back on it, I would have done it differently. I wouldn't do it this way again. And yeah, in that she didn't use the sorry word, but everybody knows what that means. I made a mistake, and I do it differently now. And I think she's been candid about that. But I do think what she said in the last couple of days is a positive. I'm glad she did it.
Senator, thank you very much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Andrea.
Good to see you. And we have developed